Hello everyone, welcome to this new CUBE conversation with Index Engines. Jim McGann, our CMO here of Index Engines. Welcome Jim, great to have you.
Hey, Christophe, it's good as always to catch up with you and catch up with theCUBE.
Great to have you, Jim. So for our viewers, I'm Christophe Bertrand. I'm a principal analyst here. I've been focused on cyber resiliency for quite a bit of time, both on the vendor side and the analyst side, and here the CUBE research as well. And Jim, it's great to have you here because there's quite a bit to discuss. Before we get into today's conversation, which will revolve around risk mitigation, and this idea of return on risk, which is, I think, something we want to explain in more detail. Tell me about Index Engines and where you're at. We've talked through the years, but you guys have been making strides in the market.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think if you follow the news, you know that cyber attacks are not waning. They're bigger and stronger than ever before. So we're in the business of providing data integrity to support recovery. So what customers are really have been fixated on is trying to stop attacks, but we know they're going to happen. So as they shift to more of a recovery focused mindset, that's where we fit in. And we have a number of key partnerships we deliver to the market through these key strategic partnerships that we have. They've been growing and been very successful for us. And I think, we fill a very important need out there, which is, really minimizing the impact of a ransomware attack. So yeah, so it's been a good couple of years. Unfortunately, it's not for companies that are facing ransomware attacks, but we can help mitigate the impact of those attacks.
Exactly, and yeah, it's kind of a great business to be in. Unfortunately, to your point, because clearly we're seeing that cyber risk and ransomware attacks are definitely not letting down. As a matter of fact, it's accelerating, and AI is only helping cyber attackers be more aggressive. So let's talk about
Yeah.
risk, because I think in the industry there has been this notion of how much is it going to cost me to protect my infrastructure, when actually,
Yeah.
I think the position you're taking, which I really very much subscribe to, is one of mitigation of operational risk, but also trying to figure out how risk can be mitigated so it returns something to the business. At the end of the day, de-risking the business is in everybody's interest. And you can do that in many ways. One of the ways you can do that is by building a very strong cyber resilient infrastructure, which is where you come in. So could you walk us through your take on this notion of risk?
Yeah, there's been some attacks that have happened over the past year or so that show the impact of risk. I mean, if you look at risk in terms of dollars and the impact of an organization, Change Healthcare, which happened about a year or so ago, their total cost after the cleanup and getting back online and so on, it's more than infrastructure. It's legal, it's compliance, it's customer perception. Was about $2.45 billion, right? So when you look at that, that's a huge risk component to that organization. Marks and Spencer, UK company, they're looking at about $500 million in terms of the cost of recovery. But there's so many different aspects to the risk associated with an attack. The recovery time, is about 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, the hospital in Mississippi was attacked a few weeks ago and is just starting to get back online. So, organizations need to think, when you think about risk, think about, if we are down, if our technology, our infrastructure is down for 3 or 4 weeks, what does that mean to this organization? By all signs, they're saying, by the next 5 or so years, the cost of ransomware attacks is going to be in the over $200 billion, globally. So, when you think about risk, this becomes a board level conversation. This becomes, an executive focus area. And I think folks like, and we're going to talk a little bit about Gartner. Gartner, the research analysts, are really leaning into this with their cyber storage focus, and how technology is changing. And I think it's important for anybody that's responsible for the infrastructure in an organization is to understand this, and to lean in very closely to this, right?
Right, so this idea that essentially what we've seen, and what we're seeing, and our research also shows that, is that essentially cyber meets storage, meets backup and recovery. So those markets are sort of combining. So from a technology standpoint, it creates two interesting sort of movements. One on the vendor side, which is what you're going to talk about. How do you evolve your offering? And then on the end user side, well, where do I place my bets? With which ecosystems? We mentioned some partners. And what do I have to consider to go beyond just traditional storage and really build in the cyber component from the get-go, because this is really core infrastructure. I mean, that's where data is written. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, 100%. I think I have a slide. I think that would be interesting to the audience. I mean, this is kind of based on Gartner and their cyber storage definition. They released a research document in February, which is the Gartner Market Guide for Cyber Storage. And if you take a look at that slide, if you bring that slide up, in the past, the old model of storage has really been very backup-centric, very much about RTO, RPO, very much about immutable snapshots of some of the resiliency that these storage vendors are building in. And it's very siloed in the IT organization. IT departments are making independent decisions about storage vendors and storage platforms. The new model is really more that storage layers becoming actively has active defenses built in, talking about SLAs, about recovery assurance. Can we recover? We just had a customer of ours in the UK that's in the financial services space. The board level folks asked the decision is like, how quickly can we recover if we got hit by a ransomware attack? The answers weren't good, and they ended up, restructuring their, recovery strategies and really putting in different storage platforms. This one was a Dell platform. Immutable snapshots are going really more towards clean copy validation. Instead of locking it down, how do we know the data is good? And instead of being siloed in the IT organization, is integrating with SecOps to be able to feed them information. So, this is kind of a summary of the Gartner paper, and and I think it's interesting for organizations that are Gartner subscribers is to make sure they check out that paper. But cyber storage is definitely a trend that is here to stay.
Absolutely, and I think the other aspects here to consider are, the types of partnerships you build. You mentioned Dell, but there are others, and how do you work in this ecosystem? More importantly, I'd like to explore with you, now that we talked about established cyber storage, or at least having those active lines of defense right within the storage. How do we get to that next level of risk reduction? What else do you have to consider? How does that play out? So could you maybe walk us through your take on this concept of return on risk?
Yeah, return on risk, and I know this is a theme that's becoming more important to organizations, and to get the attention of the powers that be within the infrastructure buyers and the executives in these organizations, you need to talk about risk, and cyber risk is a massive issue. I mean, right now the stats are saying the average cost of recovery from a cyber attack is over $5 million. So that'll hit the bottom line for a lot of organizations. And if you look at the way organizations think, they may think it's just about the ransomware payment or recovery. But if you put up the next slide, then I think you can see it's much more than that. It impacts many aspects for the organization. So it is recovery, it is the forensics and remediation. A lot of organizations, if you have cyber insurance, before the insurance companies will pay out, you'll need to tell them, what was impacted, what was affected, what was the blast radius, and so on. And it could take organizations weeks to figure that out, right? But the recovery time alone is significant. But the indirect costs, I think, Christophe, we're talking about risk, is obviously the revenue loss of downtime. Folks like Marks and Spencer, during an important season for them, they couldn't take orders online, and their online business was shut down. This Mississippi hospital, they're going back to paper and pencil, and they have to cancel surgeries and so on. But it's also, customer churn, it's regulatory fines. There's more and more regulatory fines, especially in EMEA and other geographies. There's regulatory issues that are coming up. Cyber insurance premiums are increasing. We have many customers that need to put in a defensible platform and convince their insurance companies that they're insurable. You know, but reputation and brand damage. I mean, MGM Grand in Vegas had a big attack, and you know, customers couldn't even use the elevators. You know, so people that were on vacation there, you know, it's like, are they going to stay there again? You know, so it impacts many different aspects of the organization, and I think, you know, when you talk to folks that are buying storage or folks that are handling data protection, they can't work in a silo anymore. They have to build in their approach to how they do their jobs as how they would minimize risk overall for the organization.
Right, and you'd think in Vegas they'd know quite a bit about probabilities and risk. So, so
You think so? Yeah.
that's the irony of this one. But of course, it's a terrible thing because it could affect any industry. You've mentioned at least three vastly different examples here between healthcare and retail, entertainment and hospitality, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'd like to double click with you on this, on what happens in the wake of a ransomware attack, and really double click more on return on risk and what that really means and what you can really do to sort of connect the dots and maybe reduce that gap between IT and operations and cyber and the various parts of the organization that have to really work together against what has become a true, you know, existential issue for the business.
Yeah, I mean, the key point with a ransomware attack is to be able to answer the question is, do you know where the clean data is for recovery? How quickly can you recover clean data and not reinfect or not put corrupted data back into the into operational environment? And I think that's the question. And I think there's a multiple issues there. Is one is, how will technology help you to understand that? You know, and a very old school approach at that is like, well, we have an attack, we're just going to use backup and restore it to a clean room, and we'll check to see if it's good. So it's post attack, they'll figure out where the clean data is. You know, our philosophy is, you need to do that as part of the regular, as a data service, as part of the regular operational business as usual aspect to validate the integrity of data. And if you put up a slide there, I can show you an example. I mean, this is kind of the core and the nuts and bolts of what CyberSense does. Is really, you know, in the past is in finding, you know, where the clean data is, has been kind of a very manual, very resource intensive process. What we do with CyberSense is we continually scan snapshots and backups of critical data workloads to make sure they are clean. So, you know, customers, when I talk to customers, they say, you know, I know CyberSense has scanned my backups or my snapshots, and I know I can go out about my day knowing I have a clean copy of data for recovery. So it's that level of confidence and that level of trust to be able to know where the clean data is. So it's the two questions you never want to get asked without a solid answer. You know, if you're a part of the infrastructure team, is, how long will it take us to recover? I don't know is not an acceptable answer. And are you sure that the data that you recover is clean and good and not corrupted? And again, I don't know is an acceptable answer there. So that's what we're in the business of. And, you know, storage and data protection and the infrastructure is not designed to look at data at that level. So that's where we fit in, and kind of secret sauce that we provide with our partners.
Right, and I'd like to sort of, you know, take this sort of technical view, and let's just remember what you just mentioned here, because you're working at the storage layer as well as connecting a lot of dots. Let's take a step back and think about this from a business standpoint. Most investments in IT are measured with some sort of break-even ROI type of approach. But what you're proposing here is a bit different. You're saying, if you make these investments, obviously CyberSense is one area to think about, you're going to get some reduction in risk. So let's talk about that. What can you get out of, from a business standpoint? What have you been able to observe? And why should people think about cyber resilience this way? So ROI versus RORR, reduction, risk of
Yeah.
reduction of risk,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and our friends at Gartner are, spend a lot of time. They do a lot of consulting projects, and they have a lot of methodology around this going in to organizations at a senior level to really understand their environment, understand their approach towards, cyber resiliency, and will it reduce the risk? Ultimately, it's about two things. In the case of recovery, it's about time, and time is not your friend in a ransomware attack. So there's organizations, many organizations or industries have to report these attacks. But if you have an attack, just think of this, the different scenarios is if you have an attack and your health records database is corrupted and unusable, and you need to figure out where the last clean copy is or how to recover it, or are you recovering a clean version, that could take days and you're going to shut everything down to figure that out. Whereas if you're integrating data integrity validation during the snapshots, you can say, hey, we see it is corrupted. The previous one's clean, put the previous one up. And in that case, time is not going to be exposed to your patient saying, oh, we may have had a glitch, but we're back up and we're running kind of thing. So time is the most critical. I've talked to customers that say, if we're down for 5 days, we're out of business. And that's a major airline. So, it's very sensitive, but it's also about data loss. So, anything in the data protection space over the past, decades, and you've been in this space, for years, Christophe, is about making copies of data. So if you make copies of data that are corrupted by ransomware, you're just making copies of bad data. You need to know, and I was once told this by one of our partners is, it's like, you guys are like, people think that they're going to take food and put it in their bad food, put it in the refrigerator and come out a week later and expect it to be good when they take it out. It's like, you need to know that it's bad, and you need to be able to understand, where the clean data is. So that's never been part of the storage ecosystem or never been part of data protection. And that's really where the success of CyberSense has been, is that we have built, AI-based technology that really understands what the bad actors are doing. And one of the patents that I'm very proud of that was issued fairly recently to Index Engines is our research lab, where we download thousands of ransomware variants every day. I mean, every day there's thousands of new ones, and it's through, you can find them on VirusTotal, other sources. We download them, we detonate them in an isolated lab, we study their behavior, and then make sure that our AI and our machine learning is trained to recognize that behavior. So, there's nothing that they can do to corrupt data that CyberSense wouldn't detect. And I think the only way to do that, and there's some vendors that are looking for things like changes in entropy or changes in file sizes or things like that. You know, like you said earlier, is that the bad actors have embraced AI and they're using tools to circumvent, not only the prevention tools to break into the data center, but also these detection tools. Like signature scanning is very outdated, and some of the threshold or analysis is very outdated. But they'll circumvent it, and I think they, as they spend time in the data center, they'll see what tools they use, and they'll have a bag of tricks that they can go to say, hey, this works great against XYZ tool or XYZ data protection tool. So we've architected something that's smarter than that and deeper analysis than that. And I think our partners that we've gotten to market with recognize that for them to be a cyber storage player, as Gartner defines it, they need more. They need more, and they need to arm themselves with better ammunition against these bad actors.
Right. So I think we've clearly established here that obviously data integrity is really where you want to be at. You can't just use entropy because it's like the weatherman telling you that it's raining outside, in a sense. No, you're really going to the bottom
Right.
of the root of the problem with data integrity, and that's how you can really get to that return on risk
Mhm.
measurement and have all of those metrics be available to you, because you know you have clean recovery points, because you know you can really get back on your feet with a good copy of data. So look, we've covered a lot of ground. In closing, Jim, tell us about, again, your partnerships. You know, what does it look like today with Index Engines and CyberSense, and maybe a couple of last thoughts and recommendations for our viewers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I have a slide here that can show some of the current partnerships, and part of what CyberSense is really a data service that integrates into both primary and secondary storage platforms. And our partners from Dell, IBM, Infinidat, and Hitachi have recognized that the value that this provides needs to be tightly integrated, needs to be strategic for them. And we have these relationships that have brought this to market. And if you want to provide cyber storage and provide, and a lot of these vendors, most of these vendors have guarantees and SLAs and so on. And it's beyond just uptime, it's now getting into cyber resiliency. So, Dell Technologies, we've been a partner with Dell for quite a few years with their cyber recovery vault. That's been incredibly successful. We have thousands of customers globally that use that today, and many are recovering on a weekly basis, minimizing the impact, minimizing the risk overall. We're going to market with their PowerStore platform and some of their other storage platforms, PowerStore being the first one. That'll be the first half. It's pending. It's been in conversation in the market for a while, but it's just about to be released and GA'd. IBM has their Storage Defender Sentinel, which is powered by CyberSense, and their flash storage. And I think the transition that we've had over the years is we really started in backup, because CyberSense can crack into these backup formats, whether it be Power Protect or Commvault or other platforms. But moving into production storage with PowerStore, with IBM and their flash storage platform, Infinidat with their cyber detection block storage platform, and Hitachi, your old organization, Hitachi Vantara, with they call ransomware detection, powered by CyberSense. And most all these organizations have these um, ransomware or resiliency guarantees built into these platforms. And I think as a buyer of infrastructure, you need that level of guarantee. It's beyond uptime and beyond some of these features that they've added, and it's really about cyber resiliency. And again, data integrity is for us is the foundation of a cyber resiliency strategy.
Right. Well, Jim, thank you so much. I mean, if there are a couple of takeaways for me, it's like, start with the risk conversation, not the technology conversation, although it's important.
Mhm.
Start with a data discussion and data integrity discussion, and then put a number on your risk. I think at the end of the day, that's where it's going to be more of a common language across the business. Jim, thank you so much. And again, great partnerships. Amazing to see how much the company has evolved, and the thousands of customers you have now. And thank you so much for your insights into the need for data integrity, and candidly, the fact that ransomware is not going away anytime soon, and that better be giving you a call, right? Um,
Appreciate it. Thank you, Christophe, for your time. Always good to catch up with you and theCUBE.
well, thank you everyone for watching. My name is Christophe Bertrand. I'm a principal analyst here at theCUBE Research.